Wahlberger Koschel, better known to her friends as Dolly, was born in 1880. While her family was German, she spent her youth in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At a young age, she found a job at a textiles factory. Her boss was a fellow German immigrant by the name of Fred Oesterreich. Fred was a few years older than her, and he was very successful. The factory made him a lot of money, and as Dolly got older, Fred took notice of her and the two began dating. Eventually, their dating led to marriage. There are conflicting articles that suggest Dolly was as young as 17 when they got married. Other articles suggest that she was at least in her early 20s. In any case, Dolly ended up stepping back from her time at the factory and ended up more as a housewife. Fred was not the most popular man in the world. He would work his employees very hard, and he had very high expectations of them. He was viewed as quite distant and does not really come off as an overly pleasant man. Dolly, however, was very well liked and popular. She often found herself acting as something of an intermediary between Fred and his more disgruntled workers. It seemed like people generally preferred dealing with Dolly than they liked dealing with Fred. As the years went on, Dolly was said to have not taken her wedding vows all that seriously. She had taken to meeting with other men while Fred continued to work long hours managing his factory. These incidents went unnoticed by Fred. Perhaps with Fred working hours and hours on end every day, and likely coming home exhausted and with little interest in his wife, Dolly became disinterested in their marriage. Dolly took notice of a young man that had recently begun working for Fred, a 17-year-old boy by the name of Otto Sandhuber. One day in 1913, Dolly asked Fred to send Otto to their house because she wanted someone to fix her sewing machine. When Otto arrived, he found the sewing machine was in perfectly fine condition. It was just a ruse to get Otto into the house. This would soon spark the beginning of a very long and bizarre relationship between the 17-year-old and the now 33-year-old Dolly Oesterreich. They engaged in a heated and passionate affair whilst Fred was often busy at work. They initially made attempts to hide their affair by limiting meetings to nearby hotels, but soon they began throwing caution to the wind as Otto began attending the Oesterreich residence on a daily basis. The neighbors started to take notice of the gentleman caller coming every day, and Dolly came up with a cover for him, telling her neighbors that Otto was her vagabond half-brother. Still, this ruse would not last long. Dolly knew that it was only a matter of time before Fred found out about Otto constantly coming and going, especially given that Otto was still working for her husband. So she hatched a rather unique and strange plan. She wanted Otto to move in. Otto, who was completely infatuated with the older woman, and perhaps considered himself to be in love with her, was on board with this idea. So Otto resigned from Fred's factory. Whilst Fred was out of the house, Otto moved into the attic above Fred and Dolly's bedroom closet. Dolly set him up with a small bed, a lamp, and even gave him a small desk. She provided him with food and books from the local library. During the day, Otto had free reign over the house. Dolly would have him perform various household chores, helping her keep the house clean, and they would have sex. Lots and lots of sex. Otto would later go on to claim that they would have sex up to 8 times per day. At night, Otto had to remain hidden in the attic out of fear that Fred would discover him. He remained silent, but he was allowed to read and write. Otto was an aspiring science fiction writer, and he would write a lot of stories at night. Dolly would even help him to try and get some of his stories published in pulp magazines. This situation continued for years. Fred never went into the attic, and Otto was very good at keeping quiet, apparently just as eager to keep this ruse going as Dolly was. Otto had no family or connections in the US, and it seemed like Dolly was likely the person he was closest to in the world. So Dolly and Otto were both content to continue this secret, bizarre, hidden love affair, all under Fred's nose. After 5 years of living in the Oesterreich's attic in Milwaukee, things would suddenly change. Fred wanted to move, and he had told Dolly that he wanted to go to Los Angeles. Dolly was not a huge fan of this plan, and she pushed back against it. But Fred was adamant. He was struggling in Milwaukee and had begun drinking a lot. There was perhaps some hope that a change of scenery might have been good for Fred, and it might have been good for their marriage in general. Dolly relented and she agreed to the move, under one condition. She would be given final say on what house they moved into. The reason for this? Well, she wanted to make sure that the house they moved into was equipped with an attic for her secret hidden lover. Once Dolly and Fred had selected a house and signed on the dotted line, Dolly sent Otto from Milwaukee to Los Angeles before her and Fred had a chance to move. This gave Otto ample time to install himself in the new attic, which would be his new home. Dolly and Fred moved soon after. By the time they got there, unbeknownst to Fred, Otto was already living in the house. Things continued just as they had in Milwaukee. Fred worked a lot during the day, whilst Dolly stayed home and continued her affair with her attic-dwelling lover. Otto continued to do whatever Dolly requested, and he kept the house clean and neat. This continued for 4 more years. The thing is, the problems Fred was having didn't go away with the move. He continued to drink, and in fact his drinking problems seemed to get even worse. Not only that, but he was getting into regular arguments with Dolly. And sometimes these arguments would become very intense. Fast forward to August 1922. Dolly and Fred were engaged in a especially heated argument on this particular night. So heated that Fred became violent, and Otto, overhearing it, began to fear for Dolly's safety. So heightened was Fred that Otto finally made his presence known to him. He emerged from the attic while the fight raged through the house, and he retrieved 2 .25 caliber pistols from the bedroom bureau. The pistols belonged to Fred. Otto intervened in the argument, but his presence and Fred's realization of Dolly's infidelity led to a major physical altercation between him and Otto. During the struggle, Otto fired 3 shots into Fred's chest, killing him instantly. After years of hiding above him and sleeping with his wife, Otto had now killed Fred Oesterreich. Otto and Dolly quickly formed a story, knowing that police would likely be coming to investigate. They staged the scene to look like a robbery. Dolly took all of the cash in the bedroom, as well as Fred's diamond watch, and gave it all to Otto. Otto then locked Dolly in the bedroom closet and disposed of the key, before returning to his hiding spot in the attic with the watch, the money, and the pistols. Sure enough, the police soon came, having been notified of the gunshots and disturbance by a neighbor. A detective attended the scene and investigated the matter. The detective was very suspicious of Dolly and did not buy her story that this was a robbery gone wrong. But, with no evidence actually incriminating Dolly, the detective left things alone. For now. In a strange and tragic way, things seem to have worked out for Dolly and Otto. Fred was now gone, and they needn't hide anymore. Dolly would inherit Fred's wealth, and the police, despite their suspicions, did not have anything on Dolly either, and were completely unaware of Otto's existence. If they wished, Dolly and Otto could have pursued a more normal relationship, as it were. But that didn't happen. Otto continued to reside in Dolly's attic, hidden away from the rest of the world. In the wake of Fred's death, Dolly began dating multiple men. She dated her lawyer, Herman Shapiro, whilst also seeing a businessman by the name of Roy Klum. Herman, as not just Dolly's love interest, but her lawyer, was well aware of the case and the police's interest in her. Which is why when Dolly gave him a diamond watch as a gift one day, he became suspicious. He was well aware that this watch had belonged to Fred, and he questioned how Dolly still had it despite claiming it had been stolen by the robber. Dolly simply said that she'd found the watch after the police had conducted their investigation, and she didn't think it mattered enough to tell them about it. Dolly's slip-ups continued, as she proved to be extremely trusting of people. She took the 2 pistols that had been used to kill Fred. she gave one of them to Roy Clum and the other one to her neighbour. She told each of them individually that, while she was innocent, she was afraid that if the police found the pistols in her home, that it would make her look bad, and as such, she wanted them to dispose of the guns for her. Shockingly, both Roy Clum and her neighbour complied with this bizarre request. Clum took the pistol given to him and went to the La Brea tar pits, where he threw the pistol into one of the more shallow pits. Her neighbour took the other pistol and buried it underneath a rose bush in his yard. It seemed as though Dolly may have gotten away with it, except for the fact that her and Roy soon broke up. Now away from Dolly, Roy Clum went to the police and told them of what Dolly had done, that she had given him a pistol and asked him to hide it for her. The police went to the La Brea tar pits on this information, and they were able to successfully retrieve the pistol. The neighbour, soon after this, came forward with the second pistol. The pistols matched the same caliber that had killed Fred Oesterreich, and as such the police were now satisfied that they had enough evidence to arrest Dolly on homicide charges. Dolly was brought into custody. Herman Shapiro would come and visit her. She had no idea how long she would be in custody for, or if she would ever be released. Things were looking very bad for Dolly. She was also becoming increasingly worried about Otto, who was still alone in her house. She made a request to Herman that would surely have taken him off guard. She told him that she had a half-brother living in her attic, and she asked that he go check on him and bring him some food. Herman complied, and he went to the Oesterreich house, unsure exactly what he would find. He went to the attic with some food, and sure enough, he was greeted by a pale and skinny man named Otto Sandhuber. Otto was surprisingly chatty and friendly towards Herman. Herman was likely one of the few people Otto had talked to in years, and he was all too eager to tell him his story. He told him all about how he had known Dolly for over 10 years and had been carrying out an affair in secret in all that time, that he had been staying hidden in her attic ever since they were in Milwaukee, and then he made the move with Dolly and Fred to Los Angeles. Perhaps unsure what to think, perhaps he felt sympathy for Otto, or perhaps he simply felt threatened by him, Herman promptly kicked Otto out of Dolly's house. Perhaps out of a desire to start over, or maybe out of fear of being arrested for Fred's death, Otto fled the country. He travelled north into Canada, where he soon met and married a Canadian woman, and found a job as a hotel porter. Meanwhile, Dolly was soon released from custody. While police strongly believed that Dolly had committed the murder, they simply could not explain how she was able to lock herself in her own closet from the inside. It seemed clear that she probably couldn't have pulled this off on her own, but they were unaware of any other accomplice. The police had no idea about Otto's existence, and perhaps with loyalty and affection for Dolly still, Herman told no one about Otto, for the time being at least. After a few years, Otto Sandhuber returned to Los Angeles with his wife. He began working at another hotel, and during this time, he apparently made no attempt to contact Dolly, having apparently moved on. In 1930, Dolly and Herman's relationship came to an end after they had been fighting over money and Dolly's reluctance to marry again. Scorned and no longer loyal to her, Herman went to the police. This time, he told them everything he knew. He told them about the strange man that lived in Dolly's attic, and his belief that Otto had murdered Fred Oesterreich. With this new information, the police once again arrested Dolly, although this time it was on charges of conspiracy. They tracked down Otto Sandhuber, who was now going by the name of Walter Klein, and they arrested him for the murder of Fred Oesterreich. A major trial was soon underway. It was all over the media. This wasn't just a murder trial, but it was a sex scandal involving what appeared to be a live-in sex slave hiding in an attic for years. Otto was vilified in the newspapers as a sexual deviant. The media came up with nicknames for him like the Batman and the Ghost in the Garret. Otto's defendant tried to present him as a victim of an older and more dominant woman that kept him stowed away in her attic and controlled him for years. It's worth remembering that Dolly was about 16 years older than Otto, and Otto was still a teenager when the affair began. But by the time of the trial, Otto was a middle-aged man. In his testimony, Otto went into detail about what he would do for the Oesterreichs during the day, how he would change the bed linens, clean and dust Fred's shoes while he was away at work, wash the dishes and scrub the floors. He also talked about how, when he would have a dispute or a disagreement with Dolly, he would fast. He would remain in the attic and refuse to eat anything. Dolly had a way of manipulating him and making him behave himself. When asked if behaving himself meant doing whatever Dolly wished, including sex, Otto replied, "Yes, sir, as a rule." Otto confessed to shooting Fred Oesterreich, but he claimed it was during a very heated argument, and Fred became physical with Otto while he was trying to leave the house. In the struggle, Otto shot Fred. The jury had a really hard time with the trial. Eventually, Otto was found guilty, but not of murder. He was found guilty of the lesser offense of manslaughter. But the thing is, by this point, over 8 years had passed since Fred's death. This meant that the statute of limitations had also passed. As such, Otto was allowed to go free and he faced no jail time. The jury was hung when it came to Dolly. Most leaned towards acquittal, and ultimately they just couldn't reach a verdict, so she was allowed to go free. In the end, no one faced consequences for the death of Fred Oesterreich. Otto disappeared into obscurity. Dolly ended up marrying again, and she would live until 1961. This story has inspired multiple films, including a British comedy in the 1960s and a made-for-TV erotic thriller starring Neil Patrick Harris in the mid-90s. This was an absolutely bizarre and unique case with a lot of moving parts to it. What are your thoughts on it? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It would help the channel greatly, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you, and don't forget to check your attic.